Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I assure you I will not be long. I've had pretty much my say on matters of money laundering and corruption and proceeds of crime during the earlier debate on the proceeds of crime and instrumentalities of crime bill. But perhaps just to offer a few comments today in light of the discussion with reference to the amendment before us. It would seem, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can't help but saying that our legislative agenda in this honourable chamber is almost now seemingly entirely driven by the dictates and requirements of the international institutions. I understand the need to comply. We are part of a global community of nations. We subscribe to much of what the world is doing with respect to things like anti-money laundering, etc. But I really would want to encourage, as much as possible, with all the limitations with which the government is faced, that we start perhaps seeing a greater volume of homegrown legislation around homegrown policies designed to address domestic matters, matters of youth employment and single income households and stuff like that. Having said that, I understand the need to be up to date and up to speed with the rest of the world in matters such as this, which is before us. The Honourable Attorney General, in much of his presentation, would have addressed a focus to professional individuals, entities, non-financial institutions, and he wrapped the thrust of what he said around the conduct of their affairs and the expectation of the international community, as well as our own expectations here in our domestic space with reference to how these entities and individuals, professional groupings and entities ought to conduct themselves with reference to their financial matters to avoid attracting a reputation for corrupt practices. That is understandable. I said that only to suggest that I think it is also important that government, the state, government as an entity, also be very cognizant of the fact that in this money laundering era in which we now live, and with all the negatives with reference to that obtains around the business culture and practices across the world, the government itself needs to exercise caution in its dealings, especially with reference to its contractual arrangements. Our developmental needs tend to leave us exposed to the graft of persons who are not necessarily possessed with the levels of integrity that we would like to see exhibited among those who operate in the business world sometimes. Government enters into partnerships, especially private-public sector partnerships, and because of our needs for development around major projects, whether it's road infrastructure, water, sewerage, airport development, seaport development, fisheries development. These are major areas of development for which small nations, especially when the economies are under stress, can find themselves exposed to the graft of business interests seeking to filter and launder their monies and other resources criminally obtained. Hence, therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, all I'm saying is while we address our concern and try to excite caution on the part of those who are business professionals and entities engaged in charitable work, The government itself must be very cautious and careful in this day. That's what I'm saying. When we enter into arrangements with investment entities, we are getting into bed with people of undoubted high reputation and undoubted and unquestioned levels of integrity. The Cahill saga is now before us. It has emerged as a topical item in the news again. And there are serious questions around that which are still left unanswered. And there is a threat now of heavy sums of money, perhaps necessarily having to be paid out by the government if the government is found to be at fault and liable. And all I'm saying is, I don't point to that to point to anybody. I'm simply saying that in this day, when economies in countries like ours are under stress, and when resources are limited, developmental needs exist, when your infrastructure around you is crumbling because of years of neglect, whether it is for the provision of transport services, sanitation services, sewer services, water, roads, what have you, a state can find itself rendered seriously exposed to the ill designs of business interests seeking to cleanse monies and to cleanse resources that have been ill-gotten. And I'm just trying to suggest that government needs itself as an entity to practice the same caution that it is seeking to excite on the part of others. Now, I'm not targeting lawyers here today. I respect and very highly, I've seen about 3 or 4 of the lawyers on the government side present here today, and I respect all of them highly as gentlemen and in their professional capacities, and I have no reason to be otherwise disposed. So I'm not targeting lawyers. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, just a word with respect to that. Because when it comes to the business of money laundering, this is one of the professions that tends to fall very clearly in the limelight. And I say that not to focus, I say that not so much to focus on the lawyers, but I say that to focus on the poor. The poor. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm sure you face these these situations quite often. I do regularly. I did up until yesterday, where people who are poor in terms of their economic status, means, people who are uninformed or underinformed, get into matters which require professional legal help and find that their problems are compounded because lawyers do not always hold to the highest standards of professional practice, and much of their conduct falls into question. I had a man sit with me just over from here yesterday, Mr. Speaker, 2 men in fact, in my office, 2 different cases. One, in my view, is at a serious level of desperation, and one wonders what today will bring forth for him or tomorrow. And the other is at its wit's end because he's gone now to 2 lawyers, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and in both cases, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he's finding that he is being further stressed. So you come with a problem which you think to be major, you go for legal help only to find that your stress is added to because a lawyer does not conduct himself or herself in a reputable fashion. And then, in an effort to correct what you think is a first mistake, you try a second lawyer. And Mr. Speaker, it goes on. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am simply saying that something has to be done about this business in Barbados, where members of the legal profession take advantage of and deprive poor, uninformed people of their property. Something has to be done about that. I know that there's a disciplinary committee of the Bar Association, and I know that from time to time we hear of one case or a case here and there, a case here and there, and somebody is disbarred But, Mr. Speaker, the frequency with which the dark deeds seem to be perpetrated by members of the legal profession against poor and uninformed people in Barbados seems to suggest that a stronger hand is needed and a wider eye needs to scrutinize more closely what goes on with reference to this profession. Now, money laundering is not simply about moving money that is dirty and criminally acquired. Money laundering is about concealing property as well. And that is another part of the story to be told, where professionals in Barbados engage in those activities which help people to hide, to conceal property which has been criminally acquired. My degree of familiarity with matters of money laundering as issues looked at by the international community suggests to me also very strongly that sometimes an entity may enter into an arrangement with a business interest perhaps, or some other moneyed interest, knowing full well that the interest being pursued by that particular second entity, moneyed party, revolves very much around money laundering activities. And yet you enter into arrangements with these kinds of associates. You're not laundering money yourself. You're not necessarily criminally concealing property on their behalf, but you enter into arrangement knowingly with an entity that is doing that. And I think that that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is something which is worthy of serious focus. Now, I don't stand to my feet, and I want to be clear about this, because people say all kinds of things about lawyers. People say all kinds of things about priests, some of which is true. Some of which is true about some of them in either category of persons. And not all is true. But there is too high a degree of truth, too high a measure of truth. And all I'm simply saying, Mr. Speaker, if we are going to bring legislation that seeks to create a better environment for business transactions in Barbados and to provide the kind of architecture that can help us to minimize or avoid, as far as possible, money laundering activities, then we've got to be very careful that we focus our eyes squarely and fully on professional entities and professional individuals and groups of persons. Government must look at itself, and we've got to recognize that sometimes we fall into bed with the wrong sorts. And that's all I'm saying. This picture that we're trying to paint is fuller and wider than simply some firm or some entity receiving cash or some form of money transaction, knowing that it is part of the laundering process. It is wider, much wider than that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Section 47 in the bill talks about the 47B, the compliance unit may, it says, if I may quote, in accordance with the directions of the authority, communicate information that is relevant to the purposes of this act to any compliance unit of a foreign state by whatever name called, where the compliance unit is satisfied that B, the appropriate arrangements are in place for protecting the confidentiality of the information and controlling the information and the use that will be made of it. This particular section addresses the issue of confidentiality of information with respect to institutions and entities which has been, information which has been acquired. I am simply trying to suggest, by reference to this, that we must be sure that we treat to the matter of breaches of penalties for breaches of that confidentiality. Because all it says to me is that the compliance unit has to be satisfied that the appropriate arrangements are in place for protecting the confidentiality of the information and controlling the information and the use that we've made of the information. This is said in relation to other states or other compliance units. I'm simply saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if I may be understood clearly, that it is good that we provide a stipulation which speaks to satisfaction over compliance with reference to confidentiality. But what if there are breaches? I think that penalties should also apply, and especially in the domestic space. If people have to declare their information, then they should feel sure, fairly sure, that the information is not going to be falling off trucks coming up Broad Street or traversing Bay Street. That's all I'm saying. We want to be satisfied there's confidentiality, but we also want to be satisfied that there are breaches, that there are penalties for breaches of confidentiality. Section 50 of the amendment of the bill speaks to immunity from suit. No action or other proceeding for damages shall be instituted against the authority, the financial intelligence unit or the compliance unit, or member of the authority or officer, employee, agent of the financial intelligence unit or compliance unit for any act done in good faith in the performance of a duty or in the exercise of a power under this act. And that is understandable, Mr. Speaker. But I hope that there are to be strong sanctions as well. And I hope that there are to be strong prohibitions built into the system that work against the matter of malicious action. Malicious action may be predicated on frivolously contrived circumstances. Malicious action may be predicated on political motivation. But all I am simply saying here, or trying to suggest, yes, if you pursue your duty as a member, a part of this setup here that we're providing for these units legally, you pursue your duty in good faith, you should be immune from civil suit action. But if you are found, in my view, to be frivolously or being motivated through whatever the ulterior considerations may be to contrive circumstances such that you create embarrassment and deprivation for people, then you should be exposed to the liability of civil suit. And I feel fairly strongly about that. People's reputations, Mr. Deputy Speaker, have value. People's reputations have value. So if my motivation is sound, and my efforts are in keeping with the regulatory framework, I should be immune from civil suit action. But if I'm found to be wanting in terms of my motivation, the way I have proceeded, if I'm found to be acting on frivolous grounds and for mischievous purpose, then I believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I should be exposed to civil suit liability. In the money laundering world and culture, there's something called ethical hacking. I don't know if we intend to go there. Ethical hacking is hacking for ethical purposes, for good purposes. And that is how some of the major exposés in the world, Mr. Deputy Speaker, have come to light. Panama Papers and all these kinds of things. Ethical hacking, that simply means, Mr. Speaker, if I have some well-founded suspicions about you and your conglomerate, and I have the capacity technologically to hack into your systems, then I am permitted to do that, to discover and to prove that you are pursuing some dark deeds on the cover of flimsy light. That's what ethical hacking is. And I want to know if Barbados has any intentions of going there, or if in fact we are already there. that the same way a hacker with mischievous intent can get into your systems and find out everything there is about you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the age of your children, everything about you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for a sound, good purpose. Same procedures can be used to expose your criminal deeds to daylight. And that's a serious step to take. And I presume in this age of technology that we will get to make that step, perhaps one of these days. It's just that when we start to talk about these things, we unlock the door on a lot of issues which perhaps traditionally, historically in our culture, we have not even contemplated. Just a few considerations to the attention of the House, and I'm done.
I think that what he last discussed is not a matter for the purview of this particular bill. Regulatory frameworks are not as surreptitious as that. There's a difference, sir, between regulating and investigating. And that is a distinction that I would want to make quite starkly in this context, because I'm sure while he is full of good intentions, the tone and tenor of his speech may convey to individuals who may be subject to our regulatory framework that they may find themselves the victim of such an attack, no matter how well-meaning. This environment, sir, is one that requires regulation, and the bill is quite clear. The bill says, and I believe that the honourable member read it, so I ought not to need to do it again, but for the sake of good order, it says that the compliance unit may require a non-financial business entity or professional to produce information that is considered relevant to ensuring compliance with the provisions of this Act. And this Act, sir, I repeat, is the Money Laundering and Prevention of Terrorism. That's what this Act is. This Act is not about anything else. So the compliance unit can request or require you to provide information relevant to this particular purpose, except information that is subject to legal professional privilege. So the focus of the compliance unit is clear, and I can assure the honourable member that for this purpose, absolutely no such thing is contemplated. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the attention to detail and the contribution to this debate of the member for St. Peter, Minister of Labour and with responsibility for the third sector. This covers off yet another statutory compliance, but not yet another statutory requirement. But I repeat, sir, firstly, that fighting money laundering is a matter not just for the government and its agencies, but also requiring the vigilance of the members of the private sector who may, either wittingly or unwittingly, get roped into it. And secondly, sir, I want to remind that these things are not fixed in stone. From time to time, we will have, as standards modulate and become modified, we may well have to come back and tweak our legislation so as to allow us to keep up to date with the standard. The other matter that I suppose it might be useful to mention is that in recent weeks, the Office of the DPP made an application to the High Court for orders freezing the assets, if any, of persons on a UN Security Council designated terrorist list. And I've had some calls from individuals wondering whether or not, in fact, the terrorists named on the United Nations Security Council list have any connection to Barbados. So far as we are able to establish, the answer to that question is no. However, under FATF standards and guidelines, as long as the United Nations Security Council designates an individual or an entity to be designates them for the purposes of their terrorist watch list, all states are required immediately. The term we use is without delay, and without delay in this context means within 24 hours. All states are required to take all steps necessary to freeze any assets that may be in the jurisdiction. So this particular regime doesn't require us to look around to see whether there may be assets here. As long as you are designated, we are required to get an order freezing any assets that you may have in the jurisdiction and halting any transaction that such a person would be involved in. So the fact that we made the application caused people to wonder, so does that mean that this long list of people have property in our banks or property in Barbados? Not at all. It is a global, almost a global sweep. Every country undertakes to freeze immediately all and any assets that may be in the jurisdiction. So as a preemptive issue, we do exactly the same here. With those few words, sir, I am obliged to the contributions, and I ask that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All members in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no, and change the ayes have it.
I beg to move, sir, that you do now leave the chair and that this House resolve itself. I beg to move that before you leave the chair and before this House resolves itself into committee for further consideration of this bill, that the honourable member for St. Michael West Central be appointed to act as chairman of committees.
Can we have a second, please? Question is that the honourable member for St. Michael West Central be appointed as interim chairman of committee. All members in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The honourable member will act as chair for today. Thank you.
No? Oh, beg to move, sir, that you don't leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and this House resolve itself in committee for further consideration of the bill. All members in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now in committee.
This House is in committee.
Beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
The question is that clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that clause 5 stand part.
The question is that clause 5 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that clause 6 stand part.
The The question is that Clause 6 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that Clause 7 stand par.
The question is that Clause 7 stand par. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Report. Beg to move, sir, that you do now report to His Honour the Deputy Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the Deputy Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The chairman of the committee has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited. Beg to move this be read a third time, sorry.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All members in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention and Control Amendment Act number 2. The Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention and Control Amendment number 2 Act of 2019.
The question is that this bill be now passed and be so cited. All members in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting for lunch until 2 p.m.
The question is that this House be now suspended for lunch until 2 p.m. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 2 p.m. today.